welcome to Driving Your Institution Research Performance. Just a bit around the company versus Clarivate. So our company, Worldwide Information Services, are the proud business partner for Clarivate. We've been partnering with them for over 12 years now. It's been a really, really good and insightful journey because it has allowed us to look into aspects such as the topic today, how you can essentially drive your institution's research performance, looking at what indicators are really of great importance, what do they mean, what is the significance behind it, delving into SDGs, what does it really mean? You know, so there's so many things, and we've been able to really grow with them, gaining more insight as we go along the way. So firstly, what I would like to do is just to really bring us to the essence of it all. We know that there's so much research being produced at the moment, and obviously with the current landscape, if we take it very local and we look at our own policy in terms of the accreditation policy, we know that there's a lot of pressure on researchers to publish. But also, if we think about the scholarly reputation that goes hand in hand, the essence of conducting research with integrity, and also to ensure that we know where it places us, not just as a researcher, but as an institution. We want to make sure that we don't miss any of the opportunities out there. So there's a few things that we need to take into consideration. Obviously, we want to ensure that we benchmark our research against peer institutions. Why? Because we want to strengthen our position. If you've got an eye on an institution, they're doing really well in a given field, either in a very niche area or really performing very well in line with the United Nations SDGs. You want to see where are they publishing, what's the projects that they are involved in, are they collaborating with industry, are they collaborating internationally? You also want to demonstrate successful outcomes to funders, of course. Research funders provide grants for certain projects, and they want to see return on the investment. And I'm not just talking about commercialization of ideas. I'm really talking about what was the impact of the research. Has it really contributed significantly to help other researchers in the same field? You also, of course, want to, in terms of rewarding those researchers that have really provided deep insight and have achieved that, let's say, mark of excellence, you want to be able to identify your high-performing researchers, either to recruit, of course, or to retain. Potential collaborations allows us to find the best partners. And of course, the whole world is looking towards open data, open science, open knowledge, open education resources, data management. And then part of that, of course, is open access. So what has been our contribution? What has been our impact? Where have we collaborated in open access that yielded the greatest impact in terms of the field that we publish in, or in line with the SDGs? And for librarians, often they need to justify their collection development for journal collections to look not only at usage statistics, but really drill down into it from an evidence-based perspective. So all of these factors taken into consideration can help us drive and measure research performance and the support thereof within a given institution. So when we start assessing our research, we need to, of course, use trusted data. For those that know me well, who have been working with me over the years, who I've had the opportunity to learn a great deal from in terms of research evaluation, know that trusted data is also always something that I spend time on. Because if you can't trust your source, can you really trust your results? So we need to make sure that we analyze our data, but the data that we analyze needs to be of a reputable nature. So when we look at research evaluation in particular, the resource that we utilize or make our decisions on is the Web of Science Core Collection. Now, the Web of Science Core Collection Oh, it was the first ever citation resource developed by the late Dr. Eugene Garfield in the 1960s. And he was the first one that really started linking the dots. And today, I mean, citations really are one of the main drivers to determine the influence of research. Yes, there's many things that you need to take in consideration alongside that, but it's still one of the main drivers in terms of decision making when it comes to research evaluation and research analysis. So when we look at the Web of Science, and specifically the main Web of Science core collection, so many, many years ago, it was still referred to as the ISI. It's a collection of the most important literature around the world. It covers over 21,000 journals. They have over 1.69 billion linked citations. What's really important for us is when we start analyzing and benchmarking ourselves with peers, whether it being from an institutional point of view or a researcher's point of view, or even a country point of view, you want to make sure that all data has been captured. Now, Clarivate is not a publishing house. I need to put that forward. It's really important because they're not biased towards any given publishing house either. They've got an objective and reliable editorial policy in place. In fact, I do get quite a lot of questions around the editorial indexing process. If there are ever any questions around that, you're welcome to reach out to me. I can point you into the right direction. But nonetheless, their journal evaluation process allows them to index content from around the world if it's reached the criteria that has been set by the editorial team. So they are completely publisher neutral in their journal selection process. And it allows them to really look at it from an objective point of view. All the editors have to be experts within their given fields, and then they aren't allowed to be affiliated with any publishing house. So we know that A, the data is comparable because it's all reached the same standard. B, and we know it's objective and publisher neutral. What they've also done is once they select a journal to be indexed, 100% of all author and names and affiliations are captured, which is really important because if you are author X on the list, you don't want your papers, nor your citations to be missed just because they decided to index the first 10 and name the rest 8L. So it's really important because then you know that your profile is up to date. What they've also done, so it doesn't stop there, is they've unified and disambiguated organizations. So in other countries, it might not be that extreme except for various affiliations. But in South Africa, it was quite an interesting task. In fact, it started back in 2011, and I spent quite a bit of time with the NRF at the time to look at the institutions that have merged, in some cases demerged again. And you can imagine the different variants, affiliations, spelling, and all of that had to be unified. For example, for the University of Johannesburg, Northwest University, and the list goes on. Northwest University alone had over 150 variants at the time. So it's an ongoing process at Clarivate to ensure that the data is accurate. All right, so why am I sharing all of this to you? Well, if you want to drive your research performance at your institution, you use data. You need to use accurate and reliable data. And the Web of Science is exactly that. So I'm going to move away from the introduction part, and I'm going to just share some insight into the indicators that can be used to help drive your research performance. Which really just takes me across the Web of Science, where we find not only journal publications, but of course, conference proceedings. And at the heart of it all, as I explained, is the core collection. So when we want to do analysis, we want to make sure that we do it across various disciplines: sciences, social sciences, arts, and humanities. And while arts and humanities often are looked at because, for example, you don't really have a journal impact factor that you can look into the journals, there are other ways in which we can analyze the papers being published and the publications within those fields. You don't have to rely solely on the journal impact factor for analysis. In fact, it's actually advised that you use a bouquet of indicators to help you with your analysis. Which brings me to the indicators that can be found in the research evaluation platform Insights, Benchmarking and Analytics. So we need reliable citation indicators. So citation indicators, literally, number of citations, percentage documents cited, normalized indicators. When I talk about normalization, it really means that I take all factors into consideration, because a paper published in the field of virology, or let's say vaccinology, in the last 2 years would have probably been cited far more than a paper published in macroeconomics, as an example. Not that the two are less important, but of course, the nature of the subject area differs. So we need to take all of those things into consideration, including the time frame in which the paper was published. Collaboration indicators allows us to see with whom we've been collaborating, whether it's been industry, whether it's been international, whether it's been domestic. Open access indicators, it really helps us to assess our compliance with mandates and really identify those areas in which we've published open access. Flexible evaluation schema. All right, so here is where we want to look at either chemistry overall, or we want to look at the SDG sustainable cities. I think it's SDG 11, if I correctly remember, of life below water. Or maybe you really want to drill down into those niche areas in which you do research within the field of microbiology. So there's many things that you can do with flexible ways in which you can view the information. And then viewing the information allows us to really look at it from a trend graph perspective, pie graph perspective, and really compile a report that we think aesthetically would be fitted for that requirement. All right, so I'm going to just highlight some of the indicators that are available to us. So when we talk about citation indicators, we're really talking about productivity, impact, normalization, and top performance, as well as journal intelligence. So I'm going to showcase a bit of this and a bit of analysis in between, but mostly we want to be able to determine what is productivity and what is impact. Many of you may know this, but for those who don't, the definition of impact, so therefore impact factor, impact of research, really means the average number of citations per paper. So if we talk about the journal impact factor, it would be the average number of citations per paper published in a given journal with a calculation behind it. But it really does tell us almost what the expected level of citation could be for that journal, as an example. So things like citation impact is very valuable if you are comparing papers from the same field. We want to make sure that we take the fields into consideration. We want to make sure we take the year in which the paper has been published into consideration, as well as the type of paper. Why am I saying the type of paper? Review papers are really helpful because it gives you a synopsis of a set of articles. So we often see that review papers have the tendency to may have more citations than an article. Is it therefore fair to compare a review paper with an article paper? And that's where normalization comes into play, where we are able to look at percentile data, category normalized citation information. Top performance, there's a specific resource that really caters towards the top performance. So for example, highly cited papers. Over the years, I've also received a lot of questions around the highly cited authors. For those that have heard about it, but not 100% certain what highly cited authors mean, it means it's authors that have steadily published X number of highly cited papers over the years. Each field would have its own, let's say, threshold, but a highly cited paper means that your paper was ranked within the top 1% for the field in which it was published based on the citation activity. So a highly cited paper, just to remember it, it means the paper has been ranked as the top 1% for that given year. So if you want to become a highly cited author, you need to have published at least X amount of highly cited papers. Once again, it really depends on the subject area, the number of papers being published before I can really significantly provide an indication of how many papers you need to publish before you become a highly cited author. But at least that gives you a bit of understanding. So we are also able to see our highly cited papers. So for example, UKZN, UP, have you published highly cited papers? Even ARC, where have you published highly cited papers, in which fields, so all of these would be able to be looked at, and it can drive your research performance. Collaborations, I've already indicated. You want to know with whom you're collaborating. You want to know the countries, whether it's domestic, international, in terms of organizations, and you can also drill down into author level. And then journal intelligence. There's far more out there than just the journal impact factor. We often spend time when we do this session of where should I be publishing, which is a very insightful session if you haven't attended one yet. Once again, if you want to have a session for your institution, please reach out to Nadia. But it allows us to look not just only at the journal impact factor, but really looking at things like the ranking of the journal, how many documents in that journal. It really helps you with a publication strategy to understand this. And as soon as we have a set publication strategy, then of course that can also help drive our research performance. There's so many factors at play when we want to really drive our research performance. And these indicators can be used as a guide to ensure that we're on the right path. So I'm really only here today to showcase how these can be implemented to be supportive in your strive towards that research culture, strengthening your research position internationally. All right, so jumping into, of course, the latest and very prominent feature of looking at sustainable development goals. So you want to ensure that you are measuring your progress towards sustainable development goals. What can we do in order to achieve this? Well, just to quickly highlight once again, this was set out by the United Nations to ensure that the globe is aligned towards achieving these goals, either operationally, but also from a research perspective. So within the research evaluation analysis solution, we are able to look at what is our output in terms of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, what has been our collaboration, what has been our impact. Let's say, for example, from ARC, you would like to maybe delve into ending hunger. So it's not just about nutrition, but it really is about achieving food security, as an example. What has been our contribution to this? What has been our impact in this? Where are other research councils collaborating? What have they done? It's not just about me as an institutional researcher, it's also about global partners or global peers. What have they done? Where have they published? Where have they collaborated? And we can do this on the SDG level. So the global strategies really in academia, and they call it academia, but for us, academia and research is one industry. And it really is about increasing cross-disciplinary research. It's also to establish centers of excellence in research hubs, as we've seen over the years. We also want to ensure that we accelerate innovation and develop breakthrough ideas that can really look at how it can provide the necessary almost global support to becoming that sustainable globe. It's also engaging with industry and third sector and the local community. For many, many years, we've been talking about, yes, this is my research impact, but what has been my return for the community? What has been our engagement with the community? So being able to determine our output within the SDGs and see what we have done, we can therefore see where have we collaborated with industry and what has been the influence in that space. So just as a side note, it really is about, when we look at Imperial College London, they say SDGs provide a focal point for universities, industry, third sector, and government partners working across disciplines to come together to develop and deliver innovative solutions to shared global challenges. And that's exactly what we try and do. And if you think about it from a research perspective, if you think about it from an institution perspective, I mean, we've got that center for excellence in Africa. I can't remember the exact name now. I see, Sunette, you are here, that has recently been established at University of Pretoria. It really helps us to bring innovative solutions and shared ideas together to see how we can address these challenges. So it's not just about, oh, this is my impact and that's it. It really helps you to make informed decisions on where you want to go. So looking at SDGs specifically and how we can analyze it, what they've done from Clarovate's perspective, they actually went and they mapped it back from 1980. So whilst the United Nations SDGs, let's say it's a 10-year project that they've set out, and it started in 2020. And of course, the idea is to have it implemented by 2030. But what they've done on Clarovate's side, you can actually go back retrospectively to see what has been your contribution even prior to becoming a formal SDG for the United Nations. What has been your lead towards those areas? What has been your focus already prior to 2020? So you can really determine the years that you want to look into from 1980 onwards. So really, and people often say 1980. Yes, 1980. In fact, the Web of Science goes back to 1900. Often we want to look at not just archives, digitizing archive to make space in the library, but from a research perspective, just to give you one example, back in the 1960s, and I take this example from Philip Purnell, who was my mentor in terms of research evaluation. He's now based in Dubai, but he used to use this very often. So you probably have heard the story, but nonetheless, Charles Warren Thornwhite, he produced a lot of papers in climate change back in the 1960s. A lot of peers looked at him, frowned upon his work, and really thought, no, he was off the grid completely. If you look at the number of citations to his papers, even around 2013, 2014, it was extremely high. And it just shows you that a lot of these base research that really started it all, like Florence Nightingale with her hygiene notes of hand wash as basic principles of keeping a hygienic environment within a clinical space. Those base notes and those base studies actually form the ground from which all research then stems from. So you may want to, yes, in fact, go back to 1980, but nonetheless, you can also, of course, let's say, group it exactly to 2020, 2021. 16 of the 17 SDGs are included. So 17, which really looks at the partnerships, which can already be determined with the collaboration indications anyway. So how did they start? By looking at SDGs. Well, if you think about life below water as an example, it takes, there are so many areas that really connect to life below water that they firstly introduced areas called citation topics. And citation topics ranges from broad areas down to a middle level, down to a very niche level. So the tier is macro, then meso, then micro. Macro is macro, bulk, wholesale, right? So think about it in that context. If you want a big collection of bulk wholesale things and you've got a macro close by, those would be the bulk ones, right? So we look at chemistry overall, bulk, and it's down to document-based information. Previously, and this goes for any indexing database, they rely on the source publication data. So in other words, if a paper is categorized as a chemistry and it's published in a chemistry field, it means that the journal was categorized in the chemistry, or let's say organic chemistry field. And therefore, the bulk of the research would be within chemistry. But with the citation topics cluster, they went down onto document level and they categorized the documents into each of those categories based on the document scope. So macro, for example, would be chemistry. Then we would find, for example, a second layer within chemistry, for example, semiconductors. And if you want to delve further into semiconductor analysis, you can go into OLEDs. So that would then be the micro area. I'm going to show a few examples. I'm not going to bore you just with slides, but just to give you an idea of how this was all created, because all those niche areas, those micro areas could then have been analyzed and taken and then clustered underneath SDGs. So they did a thorough investigation to make sure that the multidisciplinary, even the interdisciplinary fields and papers were correctly allocated to the right SDG. So it's not just because it's not a straightforward task, if you can imagine, because of the nature of research. All right, so level of analysis, we can look at SDGs overall, organization, publisher, and so forth, which is what we'll be doing. Just some background information between 2015 and 2021. There were 1.8 give and take SDG related documents produced. Good health and well-being had the highest share at 61%, which is understandable. Even in the research output of South Africa, we tend to see the clinical sciences. And if you think about it, it's just the nature of those areas. It's globally is what we see, that there are more researchers working in the field, especially of late, in virology, as an example, or precision medicine, which is of course a broad area, but genetics, genomics, all of those areas there are more researchers working in that field than in other fields, as an example. No poverty was the smallest, with the lowest percentage share of 1% in relation to the total SDG output. So that is really key, I think, for the whole world to look at no poverty, which is something that every single region struggles with. Life on land globally had the highest, 38% of papers with at least one international collaboration. So these type of information is really important. Of course, we're now looking at it from a global perspective, but imagine you can drill down from your institution perspective so that you can see, all right, percentage-wise, if I take all the SDGs, what has been my contribution? Which of those fields have I had at least one international collaboration? Which one therefore ranks higher than others in terms of collaborations? Affordable and clean energy example has the highest of papers with at least one industry collaboration, which one could think. I mean, there's a lot of focus on solar, especially the last couple of months, right? And about going green and all of that. So one can expect to see a lot of industry collaboration in that field. Good health and well-being was the highest papers with domestic only collaborations, which can also be very topical because certain, let's say, conditions, diseases are very, very regionally bound. So you would have a lot of researchers within those regions concentrating on specific those conditions, diseases, outbreaks, and so forth. Good health and well-being had the highest percentage of open access papers, which could also be towards the I mean, in the last 2 years, anything published around coronavirus, anything remotely related to it had to be published in open access, right? So there's a lot of drivers for these things, but as soon as you have the data, you can start delving into it. Without the data and the results, you wouldn't really know where to start. Okay, so if we look at one SDG as an example, SDG 3, the top 10 countries with the highest percentage shares of papers for SDG 3, we can see that it was mainly USA, but we can do this not just globally, we can do this for Africa. We can do it for any continent, as an example, or institutional level. We can look at South Africa and say which institutions or organizations contributed the most to good health and well-being. We can look at the highest category normalized citation impact within those given fields. I'm just going through this quickly because I really would want to jump into it on a live. We can also look at gender equality, where the impact profile really unpacks a single metric and exposes the percentage papers with no or low or high impact. So there's so much that one can do to help you drive your research performance if you are keeping an eye on SDGs. This can be done for any schema. I decided to concentrate on SDGs because, of course, that's where we see a lot of our focusing taking place, because we want to know also, on the one hand, which of those areas do we have the highest percentage of uncited papers. So let's say, for example, University of Toronto in this case, SDG 5, which is gender equality, that's the highest percentage of uncited papers. So it's really great always to know where we do well, because it means that we are obviously, our strategy is in line with our goals and what we want to achieve, but we also want to know where we can improve. And that's the key factor for driving our research performance, not just output, but really influence. Therefore, our overall influence within research is to be able to determine where should I be able to look at improving what I'm currently doing. All right, we can also look at it from a top level, from an organization perspective. And I'm sharing this with you because if you are frequently providing reports to executive or to management, you want to know how you can portray something that could be of use, so that management can get a glance and see where you are at in terms of your research performance. And there are certain things that one can do. You can look at your Web of Science documents versus your percentage share of SDG papers. You are able to do research planning and make decisions accordingly.
Melissa?
Yes.
Before you continue, there's a question in the chat box asking, shall we also address the productivity aspect as well? Please briefly define productivity first to ensure common understanding.
Okay, perfect. Productivity is always around the number of papers. So if we look at how productive my institution organization is in a given field, it really means how many papers have I published in that specific field. And productivity has different options to look into. So are we just talking about the number of papers, which of course productivity? Are we talking about the number of open access papers? Are we talking about the number of gold open access papers as an example? Are we talking about our productivity in articles only, or our productivity in review papers only? Are we talking about our productivity with a specific publisher? All of these can be answered, but the essence is it always comes back to the number of papers. So when we talk about productivity, it means the number of papers. So I hope that addresses the question. Please feel free to drop another one if you want to. All right. Also, just to, this is just some of the example use cases. I thought to keep it as practical as possible. The slides will also be made available afterwards. But for example, once again, for top level, we can look at the top 10 industry collaborations, for example, for good health and well-being. And that can then be measured by the number of Web of Science papers. So what does this really cater for? Are our collaborative decisions providing a return on investment, which really brings it more to a strategic conversation, right? But now you have the data to answer those questions. Can we make smarter decisions when exploring new collaborations and partnerships? In other words, where have we published that yielded the highest impact? If we publish a lot or a little with a partner like Roche Holding, but our impact has been substantial, the category normalized citation impact score of 19 means that you've outperformed the global average expected level of impact 19 times, in this case, almost 20 times. See, if I were Imperial College London, I would really drill into that Roche Holding and see what have we collaborated on, because clearly we've hit the mark with our projects in that space. All of these were above global average because global average is set at 1. But these are just some of the aspects that you may want to take into consideration. Another thing that one can understand is really to use the SDG schema and to look at the underlying data, because sometimes you want to know within ending or zero hunger, what has been our fields that have contributed to it. And we are able to use a word cloud visualization. So you can then find the most prolific keywords related to that given SDG. And as you can see, of course, conservation, ecosystem policy, land areas, food, environmental, so many things play a role with just zero hunger. And that's why I say it really is important for us to be able to drill down into it. For example, ICL has produced, Imperial College London, in other words, has produced 251 papers related to SDG Zero Hunger. And these are the major topics that of these papers that contributed to the Sustainable Development Goal 2, in other words, zero hunger. So these are the topics that they covered to be able to contribute to zero hunger. So not only does it show us where we are publishing, it also shows us the topics that we cover during our studies. And also you can look at the impact of those areas to determine whether you are on the right path or do you need to maybe change your focus slightly? So these things would be able to support you in your decision-making process. From a publisher point of view, you're also able to use this in Publisher, looking at what the publishers have been doing and also from their end to see how well they are in line with the SDGs. All right, so before I jump into a few practical examples, we want to ensure, as a summary of all the stories that I've told, you want to maximize your existing institutional resources. You want to make sure that you maximize your infrastructure and future investments to best uncover new opportunities, because that's what it's all about, right? You want to make sure that you drive your research towards these opportunities. With that, you need to ensure that you do effective benchmarking to ensure that you drive improvements, either from an institutional perspective, whether it be rankings. I mean, if you have any questions around that, we can set up a session to unpack the rankings element. In essence, the rankings are very similar in many ways and somewhat different in other ways. So there are things that drive rankings, obviously. You also want to make sure that you drive improvements in your research culture. We need to adapt, we need to change. There's a lot of things that we need to do. And of course, we want to ensure the quality of education. Lastly, you want to ensure that you increase your institutional competitiveness. It's positive competition. I always say there's nothing wrong with competition as long as it's positive, especially if we're all driving towards a common goal on sustainability, right? With improved collaboration and of course, which could lead to more funding, and with the right knowledge, we would be able to achieve this. Right, so I'm going to step away from my slides. I said I won't only show slides, so let me jump into the tool itself. All right, so this is Insights. So some of you may have access to it already. If you do, you're welcome to reach out to us and I'll spend time with you. The idea is to have at least 2 sessions, one to take you through it overall and a second one to have a Q&A session to really unpack use cases. So if you need to work on a specific report, I'm happy to sit with you and work through it. So we're looking at a 1 hour session overall, and then probably another hour and a half, so forth, for a Q&A session or using use cases. If you don't have any questions, I can give a lot of examples. Okay, so what I firstly want to do is just to go into an example where I want to look at the organizations, and I'm going to just showcase how we can see which niche areas as a country and which institutions, sorry, let me just clear my filters here, on a specific SDG as an example. All right, so with Insights, I am able to drill down into many different options. I can filter for author positioning. So if you want to only look at first authors, I can filter for open access. So firstly, what I want to do is really just delve down and narrow it down to South Africa as an example. So you can also limit this by Africa, but if I narrow down to South Africa, it gives me an overall guide of who has been publishing, the number of papers that they've been publishing. We can see that there are 51 organizations from South Africa. This will also include the various research divisions of the, or entities of the NRF. So we are able to overall see, we can change the dates. As we are talking about research areas and as we are talking about SDGs, it really is easy at in this point in time to go and add another research area. So I'm just going to go down and I'm going to hit research area instead of Web of Science, which really is about 254 categories that I can choose from. I can go and select the schema. So this is all the different schemas. Essential Science Indicators allows me to look at it very broadly. So chemistry overall, where Web of Science allows me to look at the different, let's say, subsets of chemistry. Citation topics, that's my very key niche areas, and I'm going to delve into it shortly. But of course, we want to see sustainable developments. So let's see, as we know that zero hunger is key, of course, no poverty. We already know globally in the beginning of the year that was the least productive field. We can update our results and we can then see, apologies, there's a bit of a delay in my bandwidth. We can see which institutions have published. I'm just going to slightly change my view here. If it's a bit too small, no way, let me put a bit, there we go. In the column, I can now see, all right, well, Stellenbosch University, if I arrange this, sorry, let me just arrange this by number of papers. I can see UKZN comes out on top for contributing to zero hunger. We can also see the number of citations. So in terms of the question that was asked, this is the productivity in terms of number of papers published. What also answers productivity is, of the 564, how many of those represent international, at least one international co-author? We can see on 325 papers, UKZN has at least one international co-author. What's the overall impact? We can say it's 1, give or take, which means it's on global average for all these papers together. We can also see there were 132 domestic collaborations. 5 of these papers were highly cited papers, and 291 of these papers were open access papers. We can also see 185 of these were gold open access. So obviously it's freely available without any barriers or rights, so anyone can access it. 52 of these were hybrid. So it allows me to do in one go a complete analysis of the zero hunger output by UKZN compared to any other organization in South Africa. If you want to add more information, you are welcome to do so. We can also do percentage highly cited papers. We can also do hot papers. Hot papers are those papers that fall within the top 0.1%. So if we apply hot papers, it will now show me of those papers published, who have published hot papers. We don't see any here, but yes, it can be determined. I can download this and I can easily share it with a colleague as well. The advantage of the visual side is it can be portrayed visually. So I can then go and say, well, let's look at the top 10 based on number of papers. Okay. And I can see the organizations at the bottom. I am able to change my visualization depending on what you prefer. Bubbles, people like bubbles sometimes. Also a tree map as an example. Okay. What I can also do is choose what I would like to see. So for example, if I wanted to see the impact, we always go for category normalized citation impact. I can see, well, in fact, it's Stellenbosch, although UKZN published more papers, Stellenbosch University came out on top in terms of the impact within those fields. So let's say, for example, you want to see whom have they been collaborating, what has been very helpful, maybe where have they been publishing. You are able to drill down further into the data, which is what I'll be doing now. So if I go into Stellenbosch University, I can click on any of the data and it will take me to either the domestic collaborated papers, the highly cited papers, open access papers, but I just really want to look at it overall. So I'm going to click on their papers, and it allows me to not only look at the organizations that they collaborate with, but I can even go down into the niche areas. So maybe let's do that first. Let's go into the niche areas. We already know it's zero hunger. So if I press on go, it's going to take me to the research area. It's going to remember my sustainable development goal of zero hunger. But what I can do now is I can go and change the research area. So I'm going to just quickly change it here. And instead of sustainable development goals, I'm going to do citation topics. And I'm going to do, let's do zero. Let's do food. Let's see. I should have, okay, let's do miso instead. Right, let me go down the list here. Okay, we've got, all right, so let's say we go into agriculture, environment, and ecology, which would only be a subset of zero hunger. Did it update? No, sorry, it didn't. Sorry. It would have been that one, but we want to do citation topics instead. There we go. All right, so let's just look at this. All right, agriculture, environment, and our update results. So this will now take me where I am able to drill down into every single area. So we can just see dairy and animal science, food science and technology. Obviously, that would have been part of Stellenbosch's research in line with SDGs for food science and technology. It really helps us to drill down, and we can drill down into every single aspect. And in fact, we are even able to look at the impact within those various fields. So it really helps us to drill down into very granular level. And this is what they used to be able to put the SDG fields together. Okay. Going back to organizations, what I'm also able to do, of course, as I said, is to drill down into Stellenbosch's, sorry, it's playing up here, Stellenbosch's collaboration within that field. So let's just go up to Stellenbosch again. There we go. And I can go and look at the collaborations. This will now change my organizational chart to view no longer all the institutions in organization from South Africa, but only those ones that collaborate with Stellenbosch. So visually, I'm able to now see with whom Stellenbosch has collaborated within Zero Hunger in line with SDGs. We can see the research area up here. We can also look at it from a collaboration perspective, which is a very valuable. So we can see the impact, but we can also see productivity, the number of papers. So they've collaborated mostly with UCT, followed by the NRF, and then also WITS, CSR, and SANBI, obviously down in Eastern Cape. And then we can look at the impact. We can look at whether they've published in open access papers and with whom they've collaborated on open access papers. We can look at, of course, it's all domestic. We can look at highly cited papers in collaboration. So all of these, they've collaborated on one highly cited paper. The nice thing is, what we can do now is, let's say we want to cast our net wider and we don't no longer just want to limit it to South Africa. We are able to bring it back and just maybe say Africa, or if you don't even want to do that, you just want to do international, we can just stand it wider, and you can now see collaborations with there we go. Collaborations with organizations, and we can see on the table the institutions that they've collaborated with. Okay. So it really helps us to analyze information. It really helps us to see where we have collaborated. It really helps us to see the impact within those fields. So let's say we wanted to go into the University of Amsterdam. We can then drill down into the authors themselves as well, with whom we've been collaborating. So let's just go researchers. Okay, so these are the researchers that have collaborated with Stellenbosch University from the University of Amsterdam within the field of Zero Hunger, that is a sustainable development goal. Of course, we can then see the impact. So this was the paper that received a lot of citations, and its impact contributed. You can see these two have really contributed, which could obviously be stemmed as highly cited papers, most probably. And in fact, if I do add the indicator, I will not be surprised if they are highly cited papers. Yes, there we go. So it helps us to also look at it from what is driving obviously our research performance. All right. So this is just a really good glance from a let's say overall view. We are able to do a really quick overview for any institution. So if our organization, sorry, I can do one for Northwest University, and I can then see documents cited, impact per year. We can see the niche areas in which they've published. I can then also see the collaboration information, which is readily available on the years that I've selected. I'm just looking at 2 years now. We can look at the countries, areas, and they collaborate. And then lastly, from a library perspective, you've got a journal utilization report that helps you to see where you've been publishing most frequently, which journals are citing your authors, and which journals are your authors citing, so both ways. And you can customize this. So if I want to go into view data as an example, and this can be done for any institution. And if you are busy analyzing whether you want to subscribe to, for example, IOP, the Institute of Physics, you can go and you can say IOP. I can select both of them. I update my results. And this is something really unique to Insights to help you with evidence-based collection strategies. So I can see, okay, so if I was at Northwest University, these are the journals from IOP that my authors are citing. I can add more indicators. So I can look at the journal impact factor quartile. I can look at the 5-year impact factor. You can add the impact factor if you wanted to, and various other indicators that helps us to drive our analysis. So we can see these are all Q1 journals, which means most of them are top performing journals. So if I was Northwest University as an example, and I don't have access to any of these titles, my authors are citing them, then it could be very well a good consideration for me as an institution. Also, it helps you to see for additional motivation, of course, in terms of budget purposes. So we often run sessions focusing on library collection development. So if you want a session specifically for library collection development, this can also be tied towards a research area. So we can look at library collection development for journals for Zero Hunger. If that is where you want to do, you can print it out and then you can take and see whether you already have access to some of those titles or not. So it helps you to build a collection. You can also look at justifying archives, because the report allows you to look at it from whether your authors are citing recent or older material. And it allows you to determine by publisher, by area, if you need to get more back files within that space. Right, so I hope I have given you some food for thought on a Friday, and really highlighting why we need to take all these factors into consideration to help us produce those results, be able to report, be able to determine where we want to go, and obviously to make sure that we uncover all those opportunities. I still have a couple of minutes before I have another one. Are there any questions? Please make use of the chat box, or you are welcome to raise your hand. I'll give it another minute or so. All right, so if there aren't any questions, once again, just a reminder, we can arrange any of these webinars and more, for example, strengthening your NRF submission through citation analysis, open access visibility, running a systematic review service from home, building your research profile. A reminder, there's now one research profile within Web of Science. Really excited about it. We'll be in touch with you shortly. We can run sessions on that as well. And for those that do have access to Insights, of course, I can offer an in-depth analysis session, a Q&A session, research tools and strategies, tracking more of your research impact, identifying key opinion leaders, in-depth open access analysis to support the libraries, and then, of course, institutional comparisons and so forth. All right, so please do reach out to us if you have any questions. I want to thank you very much for your time and paying attention. I hope that it has been useful and insightful. If you have any other questions, you are really welcome to reach out to me, and I'll make sure that I have, of course, the answers available. If I don't have answers to your question, I've got the clever team at Clarivate backing me up, which is something that I always say. But on that note, thank you very much, everyone. Wish you well. Have a good weekend and take care.